Hello and welcome to the Future of Being Human Unplugged, a series of informal and serendipitously enlightening conversations at the intersection between transformative technologies and the future. My name's Andrew Maynard. I'm a professor of advanced technology transitions at Arizona State University, and I'm also director of the ASU Future of Being Human initiative. So today we're exploring the potentially transformative impacts of artificial intelligence on how we learn. And to do this, I have three quite amazing guests who will join me in a second. But before that, it's worthwhile providing a little bit of context here. And of course, AI and learning has been a focus of intense scrutiny over the last 9+ months, ever since OpenAI's ChatGPT was made public last November. We've had people talking about how this is going to disrupt learning, disrupt education. It's going to lead to students not learning anything as they just turn to machines to do their assignments. It's actually led to us beginning to think about how we can use AI to change the ways we teach. And I'm sure we'll touch on some of that today. But I actually want this to be a conversation that goes far beyond generative AI and ChatGPT, because what we're seeing with AI developments at the moment is the possibility of fundamentally changing how we learn and how we teach. So I'm really interested in how future advances in AI going out over the next 5, 10, even 50 years potentially disrupt the whole idea of learning and its role in society. And as we do that, I have three, as I said, fantastic guests. Let me just bring them in here. So going around the room, we have Dr. Sean Leahy. So Sean is Director of Creative and Emerging Technologies at Arizona State University. He's an internationally recognized technologist, futurist, and educator, and is focused, among other things, on innovating humanistic approaches to emerging technology in higher education. And he's also host of the Learning Futures podcast, available, I suspect, anywhere that you can find good podcasts. Check it out. Next, we have Sophia Bogatirev. Sasha is a futurist who advocates for alternative and positive futures for humanity, and he also has a particular interest in solar punk futurism. If you've no idea what solar punk futurism is, check it out on ChatGPT. I'm sure you'll get a fantastic answer. He's also currently a student at ASU, and speaking from personal experience, I've worked with Sasha for quite some time. He brings a unique perspective to the role and future of learning in society. And then we have Sophia Herman. So Sophia is in her third year at Arizona State University. Again, another ASU student, and I'm going to say a little bit about that in a second. She's currently majoring in English rhetoric and civic and economic thought and leadership with a minor in philosophy. And at the risk of embarrassing her, she's also a pin-sharp thinker when it comes to technology and the future. So welcome all. This is going to be a fantastic conversation. Before we start, and I should say a couple of things. First of all, this is called Unplugged because we have no idea where it's going to go. This is not talking heads. This is not prepared presentations. This is just on-the-fly interesting conversation, which we're going to kick off in a second. But I'll also say that I have been involved with so many conversations around AI and the future of learning that involve educators and experts at a fairly senior level, and almost no conversations that actually ask students that are living this what they think about AI and learning and where the future lies. But what I found is when I talk to my students, that's where I get the most interesting responses. So this is where I am looking to Sophia and Sasha to blow us away with their vision of a future, which I'm hoping and I know is going to be far less conventional than we'll get from many of our colleagues. So with that, I want to kick things off with first question. And Sasha, I know you're ready for this, but I want to start off with you and ask you a really little question, just a small one to start with. So from your perspective, are universities going to be a thing of the past in an AI future?
Right. So this is a far-fetched idea, and I'm going to throw my dart as far as I possibly can.
Go for it.
As AI, because here we're going to be discussing things that are past ChatGPT, how AI will evolve. And interestingly enough, I came across yesterday the new generation of the Tesla robot yesterday, and that got me really thinking about the next future. And before I go into AI, I would like to bring back the 1950s, how education was, and specifically the physics department in the 1950s, or even the early 1920s. When we have all of these brilliant people coming out like Einstein, you have Feynman, and then many others, Maxwell, etc. And if you look at who they studied under, they most of the time they studied under each other. Like Einstein would, somebody would be studying under Einstein at some point, and that got me thinking that education is a social endeavor, and what a better way to make it more social is by adding an empathetic AI to it. So, for example, if we go way beyond like a robot or way beyond ChatGPT into a human-looking robot that can not only answer your questions and teach you stuff, it can also be there, I guess, for you and interact with you. It would the future might look like the 1950s, where you would just be studying under a physicist AI that knows.
So for that, does that mean we just need to do away with universities? Are these sort of natural social groups that are pulled together by AI, or do we need some sort of academic establishment where everybody can sort of live and hang out and have interesting conversations?
I think it depends on our goals, right? It depends on what we're actually trying to achieve. If we're trying to achieve and try to advance humanity as far as possible, then the current system of the universities is just not going to work. Because the way that it's set up right now, it's just not set up to do that. And then it comes to, I'm sure we'll talk about like inspiration and passion and all that stuff we'll bring up as we keep talking.
Yeah. And Sean, I'm sure you've got a perspective on that. Before I get to you though, Sophia, the same sort of question. Are universities doomed to become an anachronism in an AI future?
I actually don't believe so. I think when I think of education and what we have now, which is an institutional system to allow people to get an education, I don't see that going anywhere. I see that shifting and changing shape, but we used to have very different forms of education. But one of the big fundamental switches that has happened in the past century, with public education, is the accessibility. People are able to study whether or not they have the financial means. That form of education, I don't think will be going anywhere, and I think will continue to be institutionalized. I think it could shift, but I don't know exactly what that looks like.
So with that, do you see AI as being incorporated into those institutions or just peripheral to them? Do you think that the institutions are so strong that AI just isn't going to break them?
Absolutely not. I think it needs to be integrated. I like your point about having an empathetic teacher. I don't know if...
Because none of us really are empathetic teachers at the moment.
I don't know if I honestly see that happening. I don't know if I believe that an AI system could have the same emotional intelligence as a human. Maybe it could, maybe it has more, maybe it has it in a different way. But I think having that as a perspective in the classroom, education either needs to integrate that or they will fall behind. So it's necessary.
Yeah, I suspect that that's at least part of the case. So, Sean, I know you think about these things. How does this fit into your vision of the future?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and as someone who draws their professional earnings from a university, we hope it doesn't go doesn't go anywhere anytime.
When's your retirement age? We ought to get this straight.
Then it doesn't matter, right? Yeah, then we can. No, but so taking the question and sort of. Allow me to add some time to this, right? So if we think about posing this question, because often it's difficult when we say the future, like what are we talking about? Is that, a month from now, a year from now, 5 years, 10 years? And one of the things that I think can be very helpful to think about these things is if we think about a 30-year time frame, that's roughly the time frame of someone's career, and we can look back 30 years to where we are today and kind of look at that change, and then to try to think about and extrapolate what that might look like 30 years from now. But if we even push it, right? So let's say 50 years, 100 years from now. So in 2123, right, asking that same question, well, what role does a university play? Knowing that, right, one of the things that different technologies like artificial intelligence, and I'm not speaking about generative AI as a very narrow application of the term AI, but thinking about some of the broader terms and some of the lofty goals of AI in education, which would be to reach a status at which we could create sort of the, again, if we think far enough in the future, right, the ideal individualized tutor, which would be you would have some sort of autonomous system that would be able to give you the information you need when you need it and in the correct learning style that matches what you are best suited for, all these kind of things. So if we can take that as like the assumption that that will happen at some point, right, then it comes a question of, have we now just completely destroyed a scarcity model that has been long used as you came to a university because you had access to, as Sasha was saying, the expert, right? To learn directly from a person or something that would synthesize the collective knowledge of a domain of information or something. But if that is no longer sort of held behind a traditional wall of like what a university has done, then the question becomes not whether does it exist to offer that information, but what does it do now? So what does ASU, what does, any university you choose from, right? What does that look like in 21, 23? And kind of going to Sophia's point there, like one of the things that I really see as the evolving role of a university is to revolve less around the scarcity of expert and information and more around community and supporting of lifelong learning trajectories and different modalities, the ability to have a space and place that is embedded across the fabric of the community to bring people together, knowing that the technology, if it continues to go in the way that we are, often looking and hoping and pushing, that we will be able to have an opportunity to learn through and by those technologies, bringing then the affordance of bringing the people together, kind of coming back in a way of resurfacing that humanistic approach of, it's a space and opportunity for people to come together, to share ideas, challenge one another, and less about knowledge acquisition in that sense. That's kind of the way I've kind of
really
challenged that.
So say a little bit more about the post-scarcity model, because I suspect that this idea will be new to quite a few people. But I guess it's the idea that at the moment, relatively few people get access to a particular level of education. That's the scarcity. And it almost strikes me as if it's a model which mimics the world before we had the printing press, where access to knowledge through the written word was scarce. So only the privileged and the elite got access to it. And then the printing press changed everything. Do you see a similar transition with AI leading to an explosion of access to knowledge?
Yes, I think, and you nailed it exactly that. The scarcity model is, we've had many periods of, sort of these scarcity models or scarcity economies even, right? Around whether it's access to technology or by way of, access to education, higher opportunities for economic success and that whole societal component that comes along with that. But that's exactly it, right? Before the printing press, right? Who were able to have access to written knowledge and works and stuff? It was the most affluent, well-connected. Same could be said true if we rewind back 25-ish years to when online education really started to sort of become mainstream in the way. Again, same thing. Who had access to that? And I do see the same sort of trajectory or these same sort of cyclical points in history kind of coming back, just at different scales. And that's one of the things that's interesting about the conversation around AI and this idea, right? Is that as we sort of enter this precipice into the fourth industrial revolution, the sort of scale and velocity and scope of these magnitude of changes are suggesting that we'll see a change that we've not seen in human history before. And so that's really the question, right? Is like, will the access to this artificial intelligence enabled system allow for a truly democratized access to information that otherwise was scarce because you couldn't have access to the experts or the resources to pay for internet, connectivity to gain these things, and that sort of thing, and really sort of cracking that that model open, and what happens then, because that also has lots of other order impacts in terms of when you democratize access, you also decentralize decision making. And what happens there, right? That's another question.
So before, and I want to sort of push this a little bit further, but before we get there, Sophia and Sasha, starting with you first, Sophia. So you're doing an undergraduate degree at the moment that I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I may well be wrong thinking about this, but I'm assuming it has value because you get that degree and other people don't. So you're living the scarcity model. Do you feel threatened by AI, or is this something that you're really excited about, the idea of more and more people being able to get access to knowledge and learning?
I don't feel threatened in that way at all. I think that just by our nature, everyone has a unique perspective to give. And so the more and more people that are in my major, the more and more people that have the knowledge that I have been lucky and able to gain through my education, the more perspectives we have and the better solutions we can hopefully arrive at, hopefully come to. I think that everyone having the opportunity to pursue what they are really interested in and what they are very passionate about is only going to reap benefits for the society as a whole.
Yeah, but then how does that change things? And Sasha, coming to you, and I was actually interested in your comments about having conversations with other people that you learn from. And of course, we don't have people like Richard Feynman or Einstein around these days, but we could create a machine that mimics them, surely. Do you see a future where we can democratize access to expertise, where the machine can actually emulate those big thinkers?
Yeah, and
how does that change things?
I will actually bring you a perfect example. So I was sitting in class the other day, and I was in a physics class, a mathematics class, and I was looking at the board of what my professor was writing, and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try something different. I opened up my laptop, and I typed into ChatGPT, and I asked him, okay, here's what my professor's writing on board. I have no idea what he's talking about, right? And we're doing vector spaces, right? This is like this abstract idea, right? And I asked ChatGPT, I was like, okay, explain this to me in not as a mathematical idea, but in terms of physics, right? In terms of something that I can comprehend. And lo and behold, it gave me a perfect explanation that I was able to grasp the idea of vector spaces. And I think ChatGPT being so primitive right now, I mean, objectively speaking, compared to what we could have in the future, I see a future where an AI can actually be your teacher. Because at the end of the day, I think that learning in general is a collective behavior. It's a social act. And I think AI can just add to that. Because, I don't want to be mean, but there's a lot of teachers out there who just don't have that personal connection. They know the subject, but if I don't...
I'm deeply offended. I'm deeply offended standing up for all my colleagues.
Me? Him? Me?
Well, you considering I'm sitting here with you guys, you don't fall under that same.
Oh, thank you.
But this seems to be really important because yes, everybody has experienced that brilliant person in a university that can't teach for toffee, and so they've got stuff inside their head, but they seem to lack that facility of getting it into the heads of other people. Is this something that is this something that AI can help with, Sophia?
I will say I do think there is, and I don't think this is what you are saying, but I do think that there is value in learning from someone who does teach in maybe a different way than what you are naturally accustomed to. I have had teachers that I have wanted to pull my hair out because they teach in a way that just does not come naturally to me. But overall, that has made me a more adaptable and better thinker. I do think that there are certain cases in which it would be really nice to have someone who's a little on my shoulder and is like, okay, this is what this means. This is what this means. But maybe that could be used more how you're using it, Sasha, right now, is like a translation tool instead of like the singular teacher. Because I fear that if everyone has their personal robot that tells them exactly the best way that they are naturally disposed to learning, we could lose some of that adaptability and flexibility and also ability to communicate and really like understand each other.
I really like that, but it makes me wonder whether we can create AI tools and mechanisms that actually have that built-in challenge. So these are not just things that make it as easy as possible to learn, but they also know how to challenge you and create an environment that is going to stretch you. I don't, Sean, as somebody that works in this space, does that actually make any sense?
Yes. And I think this is also the time I think where I can come in. And so, right, I sometimes I've earned a reputation of pouring cold water on a hot idea. So let me
be prepared, Sophia.
Let me attempt to do that.
Please.
So here's the thing, right? When we think about these perfect AI tutors, what we're talking about is also something that is nowhere near capable today, right? So if you think, even when you think about the most transformative experiences that we have, when we think about like a very narrow application of AI, like the large language models, it is impressive what they're able to do. And that can spark an incredible amount of creativity and thinking about how can we challenge the here and now, right? Right today, how can I be thinking about leveraging these tools to rethink sort of the alignment problem? We can throw that term out there because that's pretty loaded, but the alignment problem that I as a human have with trying to assess whether or not you know something, right? I can give you artifacts, or I can give you trials to do, and then I can assess those things. But ultimately, right, this is a very difficult thing to try to do, is ascertain what it is. And we can get it. We're not going to touch into like the metaphysics component here of like mind and self and those elements. But when you think about having like an AI system that can do this, right? Thinking about the long term, again, putting the 100-year futurist hat on here, right? AI is a broad field, generally can think about these things in 3 levels or 3 epochs of time, right? So narrow artificial intelligence. We're still by definition in this very nascent stage of narrow intelligence. So self-driving cars, large language models, this is all narrow intelligence, right? You have a very narrow or very specific thing that can be done quite well. But then as we think about that moving into what is called like, sort of like general intelligence, which would be the first time we could have a system that could actually mimic what we describe, which again, try to get people to agree on what the definition of intelligence is, first of all. But that would be the time at which artificial intelligence or a machine would demonstrate the capabilities of natural or human level intelligence.
Right.
And then beyond that, super intelligence, right? And that's, of course, where you get into the existential sci-fi elements. But to do that is something that's incredibly complex. So back to your thought, like the idea, there's this sort of romanticized idea that if we could get to that general or super intelligent level, these systems would be able to give us exactly what we need in the way that you could sort of know yourself better than you're able to do in a way, because it would actually be able to have this information about you that you might have a harder time recognizing internally. But we're talking about a large sort of long ways away, and whether or not we'll ever reach those, that's a big question, right?
But I do think it's interesting to begin to speculate where we might go, even though we're not quite sure how long it's going to take or what it's going to be like. At least it sets a guide to our thinking. But in all of this, there's a question that I do want to ask, because it's often taken for granted, and yet I'm not sure we have a clear answer to it. And that is, what is the role of learning in the first place? So actually, I'm going to come back to you, Sophia, here. So we assume that we know why we learn. We go to university, we get degrees, we get higher degrees, we talk about lifelong learning. From your perspective, why is learning even important?
Yeah, I think there are 2 main reasons. The first is the individual. I think learning, whether that is, I'm going to use this in like a very broad sense, learning about yourself, learning about the world, learning about history and politics and psychology, all these things help us individually to better navigate the world and better navigate relationships. And the more I know about something, I personally usually feel more peace about it. I think it gives a certain peace of mind to me, and a certain passion and drive that I really appreciate. And I think most people, even if that's not in the traditional, they don't find that in the traditional education spaces that we have today, but just knowledge in general, which I think as AI continues, that spectrum will just broaden.
Yeah.
But then on the second side, collectively, I think education is really important. Learning how to, and that's why I want to really make sure that in the future we continue having that very social and community type of learning, which Sean and Sasha, you guys have both discussed. It's learning how to be a better friend and a better citizen, and maybe that's some of my politics side coming out. But it's especially important also on a collective level.
Yep. But it also strikes me from what you're saying, that type of learning, do you have to get it from a university, or where do you find that sort of learning? Where do you personally find it, not just generally?
I personally find it some in the university, but that is honestly a very new thing for me. I did not used to find my learning and education and fulfillment in school at all. That has just recently been kind of a turning point. I used to find it from the ways that were better suited to me, that interested me more. Maybe that was more individual learning. And I think hopefully AI can transition us into a place where you're able to learn through more modes.
And the reason I asked is I hear people say this so often, that the things that truly matter to them that they learn, they don't always learn in a formal setting. And I can look at someone like myself. The last time I did a formal course was, goodness me, I hate to think how many decades ago, but everything I've learned since then, I've learned in a variety of informal ways. And to me, that both seems to sort of undermine the importance of formal education, but it also opens up this huge set of opportunities around less formal approaches. And Sasha, I actually wanted to come to you with this because I know that you've had similar experiences with how you learn and why you learn.
Right. So for me personally, I'll start out by saying that I'm like a passionately curious person. So for me, learning is one of those things that, well, I'll start from another point of view. The reason why I watch science fiction movies, right? And the reason why I love science fiction movies is because every time I look at the technology in the world that they portray in those movies, I'm very impressed. And then when I look back here, I'm not very impressed. And
we're trying.
That's okay. Well,
I mean, we have some cool stuff.
Yeah, there's some cool stuff that I'm like, okay, this is not too bad. And then, I watch a science fiction movie and I'm like, wow. But the thing is that, like Elysium, for example, something like Elysium, like the Stanford Torus, could actually be possible at some point, and that absolutely fascinates me. So take me back like 100 years ago and ask me, would I rather be living 100 years ago or now? I would want to live right now. And so that makes me think, okay, if I can be just a small piece in the puzzle of trying to advance humanity to that next step to where people in the future would want to live there instead of here now, that like validates my learning.
So, and then sort of build up on that, because I love this because it gets to this idea that learning is far more than just what we do in the classroom. So now going back to that idea of how you can envisage breakthroughs in AI accelerating or augmenting that curiosity, that desire to learn.
Yeah, so that's the money word right there, is curiosity and specifically passion. Because this is what I believe. If you can bring out the passion in somebody, you don't have to teach them anything. They're not going to want to cheat. They're not going to want to use ChatGPT to write their essays. And to be quite frank with you, anything that I learned in school is just not interesting to me. Like the way that they're presenting it to me every time.
This is being recorded, by the way.
Perfect. And I just don't find it interesting. I mean, I'm learning physics in these classrooms and I'm like, physics is so interesting. I mean, you have like warp space and stuff. And I'm like, this is cool stuff. But the way that it's being presented to me, it's just, they're teaching it to me. I want them to inspire me. I think if that was the shift of education, is if it's not necessarily to teach me something or to preach and try to get it in my head or something, but to inspire me for something. They're not going to have to teach me anything. Right, I will do it by myself.
Yeah. So Sean, I want to bring you in, Sean, here as the professional educator. Yeah. So I mean, how much of this do you think, oh no, we've done it all wrong, or this is fantastic?
No, I mean, right. There's when we talk about education, and again, these are conflationary terms, right? Because they pull in so many. But I mean, for a long time, right, in the field of education, we can separate the difference between learning and schooling, right? As two, those are not the same thing. While they can overlap, they are not the same thing. But it's really interesting. So, I mean, even to that end, I mean, this goes back, I was pre-pandemic, so 3 years ago-ish, somewhere in there. I mean, even in a large undergraduate class, one of the tasks in this class was to use technology. So using AI before there was anything like ChatGPT and things. So, you know, it was a little bit more effort to get these things around, but was asking students to create like, how would they teach someone a new skill or knowledge, and asking them to basically be the one in control of how you would approach this. If you ask them, how would you learn a new skill? That's your goal. You have, whatever the module length was, either 2.5 weeks or something, like, learn something new and then tell me how you did that. I want to know. And, this panel here serves as a great sample for that. Not a single one of them thought a great way to learn that tool would be to enroll in a traditional structured course. It was YouTube. TikTok wasn't there yet, but that same idea. It was YouTube, right? Going and seeking that information. What am I passionate about? And what am I curious about? And seeking that information intentionally by what's available to me through the internet, right? And I think that, as we are sort of approaching this concept, is to be not scared of that, or not in a way of trying to be like, well, that's not, or to ascribe a value to that's lesser than anything else, but to understand the realities, right? That there is so much learning that happens everywhere all the time. But then the challenge becomes, institutionally, how do we then leverage and maximize the time that we do have you for these structured periods to give you the tools and the things that you need that can help within that subject, but also globally, right? Like, how do you learn the ability, the literacies of understanding and making sense of information? Because as you can learn anything available, how do you discern from quality information versus noise or disinformation, or so also there's those aspects there of understanding. It's not just about learning something specific about physics or learning the mathematics or the principles behind there, but also understanding the process of learning and understanding how do we vet where the information's coming from, and that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, so this touches on something that we talk about a lot in education, especially higher education, teaching people how to learn rather than actually teaching them stuff. And it seems like the possibilities are of AI completely transforming that, because it opens up access to information, to knowledge, to insights. So to what degree do you think that higher education institutions in particular, but actually this may go down to K through 12 as well, need to be reevaluating how they teach, you might call it digital literacy or AI literacy, but basically how to learn in an AI future?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, coming with that too, right, is also, well, the caution that I would also offer back to that, and I'd be curious to see, what Sophia and Sasha have to say about this too, is, when we think about using something like AI to solve that problem, or how can it help us, right? Also, one of the key components here, and this comes back to the idea of the humanistic approach to these kind of technologies, right, is that any technology that comes from a society is essentially in many ways a mirror of the society to which creates it, right?
Right.
Which means, unfortunately, that also brings with it all of the bad things as well as the good. So the biases that are either intentionally or unintentionally baked into them, and things like that too. So the challenge, even from my perspective, as we think long term, is if we don't know how to remove those biases or start to build in safeguards to protect vulnerable populations and all this kind of thing and unintended consequences, the assumption that the AI will solve it, I don't think that will be the case, right? And there's a danger there of also accelerating or further widening disparities and gaps that are already there. But I'm curious what the others think about.
Yeah, Sophia, I see you nodding. Give us your perspective on that. I mean, especially how you deal with the human element of how AI is trained.
Yeah, I think that is a great point, and I find myself less fearful of some of these some of the existential questions, not because I don't think they're important or likely, but because I have no idea, and I don't think we do have any idea. It's more of these like very tangible, real human questions that we've been dealing with since the beginning of time. So I think that is biases, that is inequities. There are, if certain countries or certain areas in certain countries are given all of these opportunities, all of this new tech, all of the infrastructure to support this new tech and to support the learning within the new tech, and then some places are not able to give their citizens that ability or don't have the infrastructure lined up to meaningfully disseminate that, how is that going to lead to some loss of perspective within the greater world? I also think that there's economic concerns and things like that. And could you repeat the big question that you asked me again one more time?
Yeah, it's really just looking at biases, and I think actually you hit on it perfectly. Somehow we've got to work out how to ensure that the technologies we use are inclusive, not exclusive, that they open up opportunities in society rather than close down opportunities and exclude people. But I actually did have a follow-on question while you're there, and somebody was asking this in the chat. And in fact, there are two versions of this. One was, does AI mean that education is going to be free? And the second one is, how do we make education free? And I know that you'll probably have some perspectives on this. Should we be looking at making education free for everybody? What's the economic model here? And do we need to break the current economic model? And will AI break it?
Ooh, I hope it makes education more accessible and more free. The concern I have with that is who's paying the people who are educating. So that's where I think something like YouTube is an interesting thing, where there are educators, there are people that are like well known in their fields. Andrew, you're on YouTube, and they are giving this education for free, and yet that is in exchange. I'm not sure in your case if you do this, but many of the YouTubers, they use ads to supplement that. However, I think there could be a problem with that. People are now saying there are too many ads. Like, our entire culture is full of ads. Like, there are always going to be these strange give and takes. I think also there are certain principles that something like intellectual property, that I think like our concept currently kind of came around the 17th, 18th century. Yet we have built a lot of our economic principles upon that. If AI comes in, and even if it's overall for the betterment, there's more flow of ideas, people don't own knowledge. What about some of those careers, some of those people who their entire livelihood has been on the foundation of intellectual property rights? Like, what are we going to do with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yes.
If I could just, well,
please.
Well, Sophia, that instantly I'm like, yes. Well, because that raises an interesting point, right? So the idea of copyright and this idea of authorship, right? I mean, this is a human construct that really didn't exist prior to the printing press. So we can kind of come full circle to this idea. But it also challenges, right? Like, what do we mean? And even contemporarily, right? There's lawsuits at present challenging some of the generative AI tools, right? In terms of there's all this stuff out there. What is happening? But I do think the intellect, you bring up the intellectual property component, because I think this is again going to be another place where this conversation is going to be, larger than the context of education, but more at a global societal level, and thinking about what does it mean to have authorship in a space where there's so many. I mean, you could argue the derivative nature of so much. Like, is there genuinely anything truly new and unique anymore in some senses, right? That can't be or weren't informed and a derivative of, and things like that. But it raises a really interesting question about what happens to this idea, because ultimately, if you think about intellectual property, you might even start to question the motive behind it, right? Is it really to protect the person who creates the object, or is it to protect the economic interest of those who hold the copyright for that, right? We see this at music industry all the time and things, where the actual creator isn't the one who holds the copyright. And so that's I would say in terms of future economic system, I think that's a fair place that there's a lot that can happen in that space and should be challenged.
So keeping your futurist hat on there, imagine a future where advanced AI has just scaled access to knowledge beyond imagination, and in ways that aren't necessarily connected to commercial enterprises. And one of the things I find interesting here is if you look at the foundation models behind current generative AI, they are rather general models that different organizations can build on. So we can look at a future where we've got an underlying technology which isn't connected to one specific company. Can you imagine an AI future where these apps and these capabilities are so compelling that they completely disrupt the current economic models around education, and they force us to rethink the nature of how information flows and how learning is carried out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is yes, right? And then again, that's coming back to, I think, the opening question that you had asked, Andrew, right? That is sort of the impetus of the assumption isn't like that, will it be possible or not? I think the answer is yes. The question is when. And and then there's going to be lots of fringe elements.
And how do we prepare for that?
That's it, right? And that's where that question comes. Like, what does the institution of higher education or learning, right? What does that look like? Are these spaces and places that support individualized learning? So instead of being a one-to-many sort of environment, right, you come to a space of learning that can adapt to you as well. So not just your physical needs, but also, again, from a learning perspective, and thinking about changing that entire thing, where if you no longer have to come there to get that information, you're coming there because you can receive that information in a personally tailored way, or something that responds to you in that sense. Again, challenging this idea of, well, if the information is no longer scarce, what other elements become the value and the thing that bring you there? I think we come all the way back to that first question.
Yeah, and which I think is a fantastic place to round up. Before we do, though, I have one final question for each of you. I'm going to start with you, Sean, seeing that you're on the screen. So putting your visionary goggles on, tell us in just 2 or 3 sentences what your vision is of AI-based learning 30 years from now. What would be a future that you just think that is just so amazing?
Okay. In 30 years from time, it would be amazing to have an individualized AI tutor that I can talk to. So the personalized assistant that is contextually aware of where I am and what I am doing. So it can respond to me as if it were with me, and being able to give me the information that I am seeking, including where am I? Because in 30 years, I don't know if I'll still have my faculties. So, dear AI, where am I? What was I doing? Why did I come in this room again? That would be very helpful. And who am I talking to?
Right. Yes. That was great. Sasha, I'm going to come to you next. 30 years time, what's your vision?
I'll give you it in just one word, and that is Jarvis. I would love to.
But you've got to contextualize it for all the viewers who have no idea who Jarvis is.
So this is an artificial intelligence, or at this point, it was a general AI when it was in the first Iron Man movie, and it basically helped Tony Stark construct his first Iron Man suit. It was there interwoven into his giant company, and basically had eyes and ears everywhere, and was able to give Tony the information that he needed when he needed it.
And I think that's fantastic, because as a vision of learning and personalized learning and transformative learning, I think it works extremely well. Sophia.
Yeah, being less on the in the technical side, I wish I had as much of that perspective. I unfortunately have some of this more like broad political, but I will say the main things for me are accessibility, like the ability for people to learn in the ways that are suited to them, the ability to expand learning opportunities, not just within the US, but everywhere, and also new perspective. I hope AI will help us gain and understand new perspective, and then hopefully build new communities. I have no idea what that looks like. My concern is honestly less of what it looks like and more about how do we get there, and not step over or trample on some of the people that are more vulnerable within this process. If I have a little robot in 30 years that's able to help me, I would love that. I'll get it. I just hope we can get there in a way that is just.
I think that is a really compelling and a really challenging place to end. Thank you so much for that. That actually brings us to the end of this episode of The Future of Being Human Unplugged. A huge thank you to my guests, Sophia, Sasha, and Sean. That was just a fantastic conversation. And just to remind you that you'll be able to rewatch this on our YouTube channel and also on the Future of Being Human website at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu. And also a reminder that our next conversation is coming up on October the 24th. This will be broadcast at 10 minutes past 11 in the morning Pacific time, when we will be asking, do AIs dream of electric people? Looking forward to seeing you there.